Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And tonight, it's another of our All Things Canada edition. We are recording this roughly 2 weeks before Canadians cast their vote in the general election for the federal government and parliament. And just before we get into this discussion, this debate, the Trudeau era of three minority liberal governments is over. And once
Gone.
more, Canada is not really in a good shape. Gross levels of inequality, high rates of homelessness that are brutally evicted, settler colonialism and the calls for truth and reconciliation following Canadian apartheid towards Indigenous people, residential school denialism is on the rise, and still a huge murdered and missing Indigenous woman and two-spirit phenomena. And the truth has gone out. I'm not sure about the justice and reconciliation parts. Police brutality and lack of accountability to Black and Indigenous and immigrant communities, that still is going on rampant. Western Canada, notably Alberta and Saskatchewan, still feeling alienated and calls to secede if the Liberals return to power with the NDP and Bloc backing are there now. Now, if Alberta ripped all the tar sands out of the ground and sold it to the highest or lowest bidder, that's game over for the climate crisis, and not exactly sure if anyone, not least Albertans, gain from their aggressive extraction agenda if they gain their independence. And most Quebecers and Canucks are still not bilingual. So, all this to say, Canada is still bitterly divided. But thanks to Donald Trump, he's made Canadian nationalism, including the subcategory left nationalism, he certainly has made that great again. And despite all of what I just described, the ruling Liberal Party may even, despite supporting a genocide of the Zionist entity known as Israel towards the indigenous Palestinians, might win in either a major landslide or return to minority government led by Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada, Ireland, and England. And if not, we might have a huge comeback or a minority government led by Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party. These are two rival oligarchs, two rival imperialists, and two settler colonialist parties. But there is an alternative. There is the left-leaning Social Democratic Softly Workers Party, the NDP, New Democratic Party, who, though not in formal coalition with the Liberals, kept them afloat with a supply and confidence agreement in support of the Liberals purchasing fighter jets and spending 2% of GDP on NATO and militarism. The Liberals, though, dragged kicking and screaming, expanded dental care and passed pharmacare, but looks like once more the NDP might not be able to unseat the Liberal or break the duopoly of ping pong between Liberals and Conservatives, as angry voters feel the NDP shouldn't have propped the Liberals up, and key promise of pharmacare or expansion of dental care for some came too little, too late, as provinces still need to sign up for it, and still it's being tested. And the NDP's housing policy, amongst others, one wonders how much it's different from the Liberals. And so, here to discuss whether the left in Canada should vote NDP or not vote for NDP. But if you're in the riding and alternative left is available, then vote communist. I'm joined by two guests. Barry Weisleder of the NDP Socialist Caucus and member of Socialist Action Canada and Workers' Action Movement, which is trying to wham it to the union bosses and make sure the unions are the vanguard of revolutionary change. He will make the case why the Canadian left and left-leaning folk should vote for the NDP in this or any federal election. And his opponent is Ivan Stoiljkovic, a bus driver, violin teacher, a Yugoslavian-Canadian from Serbia who is a communist, a lifelong housing as a right activist, member of the Communist Party of Canada, a lifelong leftist activist like Barry, always on the right side of history and fighting a good fight. He will make the case why Canadians who are left-wing or left-leaning shouldn't vote for the NDP. And if they can vote, if they have one in their writing, vote for the Communist Party or some other alternative left candidate. So, gentlemen, comrades, friends, welcome to the program. It's an honor to have you both on.
Thanks, Yuri. I think you covered the subject completely, so I'm going to go watch a hockey game.
Okay, so we'll do this. I have
Hockey first. Hockey comes first at 7 o'clock. Leafs versus Habs. Toronto versus Montreal.
You got it.
So this will definitely be over by 6:30.
Okay. But Yuri covered the waterfront, as they say. So
all right.
I can open up if you want, or how do you want to do it? You want to pose questions?
Yes, exactly. So Barry, let's start with you. So imagine so Barry, you're going to go first, followed by Ivan. So Barry, let's start with you. So imagine you're speaking to an audience right now of 1+1 viewers and subscribers, or to your own audience of Socialist Action Canada, which I've been a member of the audience so many times on the live streams on YouTube. Or imagine we're, all three of us are speaking to a packed theater or bar, and our audience is left wing or left leaning. Explain why you feel they should vote NDP and not engage in the stupid, insane, own goal and counterproductive, counter-revolutionary nonsense that is tactical voting, hold their nose, voting liberal. And if there's some issues you want to address before you make your case why people should vote NDP, feel free to do this.
Well, like I said, Yuri, you don't leave much for us to say. The federal election campaign in Canada is now at the midway point. Mark Carney, the new Liberal leader and Prime Minister, he pledges to cut social spending and offers more government investment into the private sector. This, along with his cancellation of the capital gains tax hike, reveals a shift to the right by a career big banker. Carney promises to increase military spending. Instead of canceling the procurement of fighter jets, he suggests the possibility of shifting from the US-made Lockheed Martin F-35s to a European producer. I don't know if there's a producer in Belgium, but this could be their lucky day.
Exactly.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's pathetic response is to demand that the multi-billion-dollar war jets be made in Canada. What an honor that would be. And as the policy differences shrink between Carney and Tory leader Pierre Poilievre, the parties which were neck and neck in the polls up till about a month ago now show a separation with the Liberals about 6 percentage points in the lead, and the NDP way back, still in third place, but with less than 10%, maybe 7 or 8% possibility of half a dozen seats, which is a great reduction from the status quo ante. As the two main party leaders adapt to each other's policies, the media has been concentrating on the personality differences between the two. Portraying Pierre Poilievre as angry and negative, and Mark Carney as the calm and astute, and although occasionally a bit prickly. These absurdities fill the airwaves, while millions of workers are impacted by the tariff war, Indigenous people and everyone else who will be harmed by the corporate agenda to increase the sale of fossil fuels to new foreign markets. So the latest surveys show a major loss in votes and seats for the labor-based NDP. So why should someone vote NDP? Well, it's very simple. It's a class vote. The NDP is the only party in North America that has links to the trade unions. When you have you ever been to an NDP convention, Yuri?
Nope, I haven't, and don't know if Ivan has, but
I have.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you go there, and he'll know, and you'll find out that there's row after row, tables after tables after tables in the convention hall, festooned with union identification placards. You won't see this at the Liberal Party convention. You certainly won't see it at the Conservative or even the Green Party convention. The NDP is a working class party. But like the unions, and I don't think anyone here would deny that the unions are working class organizations, like the unions, the NDP leadership is pro-capitalist. just like the union leadership is. I can think of maybe 2 or 3 leaders of unions in the Canadian state who are not enthusiastically pro-private enterprise, pro-capitalist. There's just 2 or 3 exceptions. And even then, it's not widely publicized. So if we support our unions, if it's wrong to cross a picket line at a workplace where workers are on strike, it's equally wrong for working people to vote for a capitalist party, whether it's a liberal, conservative, or green, or Bloc Québécois. It's like strike breaking. But how about a positive reason? The positive reason is simply this. If you want to affect the relationship of forces between the main classes in Canadian society, you have to vote for the party that represents your class as a worker. Not all unions belong to the NDP, are affiliated to it. In fact, some unions, usually very small locals in the building trades, but there's some exceptions, have appeared at Pierre Poilievre news conferences and have attested to their support for him and for that party. But this cleavage in the ranks of labor is not as significant as the capitalist media would portray it to be. However, if you want to affect the relationship of forces between the classes, you vote for the Labour Party. If there was a radical leftist party, a Marxist party like my own Socialist Action, I would say vote for that. You could make the case for the Workers' Party in Belgium, for example. We were talking about that before the show. But that doesn't exist in Canada. Any vote for a small leftist party with just a few hundred members or less, which is incapable of running candidates in more than 30 or 40 or 50 ridings, and even so, it would deplete the party bank account to pay to run that many candidates, even though it's a tiny fraction of the House of Commons, makes no sense. Makes no sense whatsoever. It's throwing away the vote on a party which, well, in many cases, is just as reformist as the NDP, but tiny. So if I have to choose between a tiny reformist party and a major reformist party that holds the provincial government in several provinces of the country, I would vote for the larger one and enter it and participate in the debate there to win working people to an anti-capitalist perspective, to a socialist and feminist perspective. That's politics where you can try to have an impact on what millions of people think, not sideline, navel gazing. So the NDP is an option. It was established in 1960-61 when the Canadian Labour Congress and the CCF, the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, merged into one party, and it remains, that alliance remains in place. And so that's the reason. And the policies of the NDP leave a lot to be desired. They're terrible, especially on foreign affairs. But you can fight inside that party and inside the unions, whether they're affiliated or not. You can fight for socialist policies. I don't think any serious socialist, maybe some anarchists, but no serious socialist would abandon the unions because they don't like their policies or their leadership or the way they do things. Nobody. Same applies in this case. Get in there and fight. If you want to win millions of working people to liberation, to social justice, that's where you got to be.
Interesting. Ivan, your turn. Why do you feel Canadians of good conscience, Canadians who want common decency, Canadians who are truly left-wing or certainly left-leaning, why do you feel that not only should they not engage in tactical voting, but you don't think, but that they should not vote for the NDP, even as a kind of constructive protest vote, but votes, and I assume you're an advocate that people vote for the Communist Party of Canada, including in the province of Quebec. Please make your case. I'm curious your response.
Nice to see you. Thanks for the invite again. Just a little correction. You said I was a bus driver. I'm no longer a bus driver.
Okay.
I was fired. I was fired from driving a bus because I spoke against the developers' agenda at a public town hall in Kingston. So in a great tradition of being persecuted for being a communist, I too, am unemployed currently, or not precariously employed and whatever.
Sorry to hear about that, but at least
no,
still always fighting the good fights.
Because I have positions that are incompatible with getting bread. You asked us to imagine that we're talking to a leftist audience. I don't think that that's the best idea. I think that we should be talking to the workers. And the workers are between 80 and 99% of the population, depending on how you want to define what a worker is. In other words, everyone is a worker. Since more or less everyone, right? In the capitalist society, there's a tiny group of capitalists that own everything, and there's a massive working class. Since workers were allowed to vote, all the parties have addressed themselves to them because they're the ones that vote. They're the ones that make the decisions of who gets elected and who doesn't. I don't think it's fair to describe only one of the bourgeois parties as the Workers' Party. I think they're all addressing themselves to workers. They're all supported by workers. And it's basically a political, I wouldn't want to call it struggle because it's a lot more civil than that. It's a political contestation between workers who are heavily influenced by the fact that all means of propaganda are owned by those very few people who in fact determine the policies of those parties. So who we should be addressing is this massive working class of our country or whatever country we may be in. And we should recognize that they are not represented by a labor aristocracy. They're not represented by university professors. They're not represented by the students. They're not represented by various social movements or leaders of social movements that make up the NDP. NDP is not the workers. The party bureaucracy, just like the liberals and conservatives, is not the workers. It's the professionals. It's the professional managerial class for the most part. Anyway, I agree with Barry about the NDP platform being pathetic, especially on the foreign policy and imperialism. It's an imperialist genocide supporting party. And, I do draw the line at genocide. And I do draw the line at supporting NATO, which is the biggest aggressor in the history of the world, the biggest military alliance, the most active military machine that just doesn't stop. So as far as the Communist Party, I don't hold a position in the Communist Party. I don't speak on behalf of the Communist Party, but I am a member, and I do believe that people should vote for the Communist Party. Why is that? Because Communist Party is a party that has existed for 100 years and that has been affiliated with other communist parties across the world who have successfully overthrown capitalism in places and who have fought for peace and socialism and so on. And it is not a reformist party. It does have reformist. I mean, if you want to call Communist Party a reformist party, then you would have to still distinguish between the kind of reforms the Communist Party has in its policies, and the kind of policies that NDP has. So, whereas NDP believes in their housing, as we already mentioned, whereas they believe in remaining in NATO, in continuing to support genocide, and continuing to support wars of imperial conquest on Russian border and probably in China, etc., etc. It is also, I mean, its housing policy is to hand over the money, billions of dollars to whoever is shovel ready. And who's shovel ready? Capitalists, the developers. They exactly like the liberals and the conservatives. They believe that the housing problem is the what do you call it? It's a supply problem. So there's not enough housing, so we just need to build more housing, and then if we allow, private for-profit developers and landlords to build more and charge whatever they want, eventually, the prices they'll price themselves out of business for some reason. That's nonsense that feeds into the other, racist tropes. That the number of immigrants coming into Canada is actually putting pressure on the housing supply, and therefore there's not enough. No nonsense. Communist Party has it on the books that only publicly owned rent geared to income housing should be built, and 3 million units, etc. We have expropriation on the books of the big landlords. Communist Party advocates for nationalization of big industry, of environmental affected industry, as in like in energy and banking, etc., etc. So it's I'm not going to say that it's a revolutionary program in a sense that the Communist Party is saying right now we need to exterminate all the capitalists and I don't know, institute communist utopia overnight, but it is definitely a program that is far to the left and far to the it's challenging to the capitalist system. It's very challenging to the capitalist system. It basically calls for expropriation of the big capitalists. It calls for housing for all. It calls for childcare for all. It calls for, and you could say that a Communist Party is what NDP should be. You would have to make a huge leap and kind of assume that NDP, should be or has there's some reason why NDP shouldn't be a bourgeois imperialist, party, but should instead be a social democratic party. But social democracy in an old sense that is supposedly where NDP comes from, and if it went all the way back to its Regina Manifesto, then it would maybe kind of a little bit sort of resemble what the Communist Party is right now. Now, just why vote for the Communist Party and not NDP? Obviously, because you don't want to vote for genocide. You don't want to vote for capitalism. You don't want to vote for imperialism. You don't want to vote for NATO. You don't want to vote for fighter jets, etc., etc. You don't want to vote for colonialism. You don't want to vote for, genocide, ongoing genocide. And I don't mean just genocide in Palestine. I mean, people are being killed on streets of, Canadian cities with homelessness and freezing and hunger. And one of the things that I don't know if you mentioned it, but I have been, an anti-poverty organizer for, I don't know, some kind of 30 years or something. And I ran on on that kind of platform in municipal elections for a mayor of Kingston, Ontario. So that's the obvious reason to vote for the party. It's not the only party that runs candidates. There's also the Communist Party of Canada, Marxist-Leninist. There are ridings in which, the Communist Party of Canada is not running candidates, and Communist Party of Canada, Marxist-Leninist is. It's a similar party. to the Communist Party of Canada, and there are others, including, I would think, Barry's own, whatever you call that. I don't know if you call it a party or whatever it is, but there is a lot of left groups. Now, you don't vote for the small parties. That's like saying, in Nazi Germany, everybody was a Nazi. What's the use of, resisting? Because it's too small. The left is too small.
I would really go there, but
that's what it is. It's too small. Well, Lenin's party was too small. Tito's Yugoslavian party had, I don't know, 8,000 people when the uprising started in 1941. We ended up with Yugoslavia. Lenin ended up with Soviet Union, and et cetera, et cetera. Like how many communists were left in China after Chiang Kai-shek, had orchestrated a massacre in Shanghai. So you got to start somewhere, and you may as well start with the. And what I'm saying is it's not just Communist Party. My point is that it's not just the Communist Party.
Yeah.
It's the entire left, and there's so much. It's not just the left. Again, let's not just address the left. A lot of people who are voting for Bolivar or for Trudeau or Carney or whatever are people who are furious with capitalism and imperialism and wars and just want change. Well, let's grow this tiny little thing so that and let's give people something to support and something to build and something to vote for.
Okay. Now Barry, so sort of piggybacking on what Ivan was saying, except for the Nazi comments. Now, Barry, many leftists, including like-minded people who might not be NDP members or members of the NDP Socialist Caucus or Socialist Action Canada, they'll say to you the following: Barry, the NDP is a diet liberal party. They are also grossly anti-Indigenous. They're not climate champions. They're selectively anti-pipelines. As Ivan said, their housing plan is not going to help the low-income folks, not least the mass working class, working poor, and tiny precarious middle class. And that even on the imperialism, they're devoted to NATO, the pivot to Asia, and even anti-Palestinianism, just not as bad as the rest of the rotten bunch in Ottawa and nationwide. So what of the NDP's manifesto and their advocacy or statements they've made or arguments they've made that a form of pharmacare, dental care expansion was made possible because of them? Do you think Canadian leftists and the cranky tinkies and so forth should not overlook? And if people aren't too impressed with the NDP, why do you think, whether it's socioeconomic affairs in Canada or imperialism abroad, climate crisis, why the NDP are a more constructive protest vote as opposed to tactical voting, no voting, or voting for an alternative left party like the Communist Party or Marxist-Leninist Party?
I appreciate what Ivan said, and I agree on some points, but he's given me a lot of material. So I would like to comment on some of the things that he said and answer your question, Yuri, as well. Okay. For one thing is really unique that I've never heard anyone on the left or otherwise argue. Never heard it before. All parties are workers' parties. That's patently untrue. It's true that workers vote for conservative candidates, liberal candidates. Fewer of them vote for Green candidates. More of them vote for NDP candidates. But even the People's Party of Canada gets workers to vote for it, even though it's less than 1.5%, according to the latest polls. So the notion that all parties are workers' parties makes absolutely no distinction organically or sociologically with respect to the NDP and all the others. The NDP was founded by the Canadian Labour Congress that joined together with the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. The CCF was famously the governing party in Saskatchewan in the 1940s that introduced Medicare. So the notion that the NDP is not different from the others, I think is just, it beggars credibility. Now, with regard to the policy of the NDP on foreign affairs, it is horrible, horrible, but it has shown the effects of the global pro-Palestinian movement against the genocide, movement against the occupation, policies against the refusal of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and against the vicious attacks by settlers and by the Israeli occupation army in the West Bank, which continue to this very moment. What impact has it had on the NDP? It has had a massive impact, massive impact. The NDP is officially against the genocide. It's officially for an arms embargo. It's for officially recognizing a Palestinian state, although that's not good enough. In fact, that's very similar to the policy of the Communist Party, which is two-state solution. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the NDP is for a two-state solution, which means that one of the states of the two, according to this thinking, according to this formulation, would be the Zionist state of occupation on historical Palestinian land, and would not allow the people who were displaced in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to come back home. Many of these people belong to families that still have the key to the front door, in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, in the major cities of the country. So the NDP is anti-genocide, for the arms embargo, and all the other things I mentioned. And why? Because the NDP is full of people who are part of the social justice movement, unlike the Liberal Party, unlike the Conservative Party, unlike the PPP or even the Bloc Québécois. It's a different kind of party, and all you need to do to verify what I'm saying, because maybe I'm lying, go to an NDP convention and see all the union placards on the tables and chairs in the convention. Easily a third of the delegates at every NDP convention, from the East to the West and the federal conventions, are union elected delegates. Now, we don't like the policies, but we don't like the policies of the leaders of the trade unions. So are we to boycott them and vote for some communist unions? That's absurd. And Lenin argued against that policy himself in a famous booklet, Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. So where do we disagree? Where do we disagree? Where do we disagree? The difference between reform and revolution. As a socialist, as a leader of a small socialist party, Socialist Action, and as chair of the NDP Socialist Caucus, which, by the way, has the support of hundreds of NDP members, hundreds. And we usually at conventions win policy fights. That's why they try to keep our policies off the floor, because we generally win. And our candidates get between 15 and 35% of the vote when they challenge the NDP president, the vice presidents, the executive members at large, the candidates for various equity-seeking groups. We typically get, a quarter to a third of the votes at the conventions. That wouldn't happen at the Liberal Party convention or any of the others. So where's the difference? Reform versus revolution. Okay, I'm for reforms, but not as a strategy. And the Communist Party is for a strategy of reforms. That is the reform of the Canadian state from within. There's another group that articulates this openly. They're called the Socialist Project. Sam Gindin was associated with them. They say reform the state from within. They're opposed to taking down the state. Now, of course, that's not on the immediate agenda. It is in some countries, but not in Canada, to smash the bourgeois state and replace it with a worker state. No, it's not yet on the agenda. But the point, comrades, is this. It will never be on the agenda if people don't talk about it, if they don't advocate it, if they don't present it, if they don't fight for the idea of independence from the state and from the corporate elite and its political parties. The NDP is in a dialectically contradictory position. It is independent of the state and independent of the capitalist parties. No capitalist enterprises give money to the NDP. None. No Canadian daily newspaper gives support to the NDP for 60, 70 years, except once the Toronto Star urged a vote for the NDP. And then it was qualified because it was a very right-wing agenda under Tom Mulcair, who, by the way, just said, he's a former NDP leader. He said, vote Liberal. Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, should get out of the way so they can concentrate on defeating Pierre Poilievre. The NDP policy on housing leaves a lot to be desired, and I agree with what Ivan said, what kind of policy we need in that regard. But the question is the state. Are we for this state, or are we running as tribunes of the people, as Lenin said, to do anti-parliamentary propaganda? That was his phrase, anti-parliamentary propaganda. Well, the Communist Party, the Socialist Project, and other groups like that are not anti-parliamentary. They're for the bourgeois state. They simply want to reform it. And what's wrong with saying that when revolution is not on the agenda? Well, revolution was not always on the agenda in Chile. But in 1972, the Unidad Popular, Salvador Allende, was overthrown after he took, liberals, and after he took the generals, including Pinochet, into his cabinet. And the Communist Party of Chile applauded that. He said, we have to diffuse the crisis. This is the way to do it. Bring the patriotic elements of the bourgeoisie into the government of Salvador Allende. The result was a massacre. 20,000 leftists killed, many of them in the soccer stadium in Santiago. And this has happened again and again. The Shanghai Massacre, I'm glad that Ivan mentioned it. What happened in 1927? The Kuomintang turned against the Chinese Communist Party, and they killed hundreds of thousands of people. Why is that a contradiction in some sense? Because Stalin had Kuomintang inside the Communist International. In fact, one of the vice presidents of the CI was the leader of the Kuomintang. So that was a betrayal of the working class in 1927. It was a betrayal of the Chilean workers in 1972. It was a betrayal of the Palestinian people when Joseph Stalin directed his representative at the United Nations in 1947 to vote for the creation of the Zionist state. So talk about pro-genocide, talk about, class independence, talk about the historic rights of the Palestinian people for justice and self-determination. The biggest attack on their right to self-determination was the creation of the Zionist state, for which the Soviet Union voted at the United Nations. Why? Why did they do this? This is another sign of their confusion about the nature of the state. Stalin and his cohort thought that the Communist Party of Israel, the Rakach Party, would be part of a government at independence, would be part of a coalition government at independence. So they threw the Palestinians under the bus, and they opted for the creation of a state because they thought they would have a share of power. But when you're in a government, you don't have the power. The bourgeoisie has the power. And this is where, people who call themselves communists ought to know better, that you need more than the government. You need the state. And you have to fight for that. If you're elected to the Knesset or you're elected to the Canadian Parliament on a radical Marxist program, of course you take your seat, even though we're still in a bourgeois state, but you do anti-parliamentary propaganda. You explain that the state is not neutral and can never be on our side. And you have to educate people so that when the day comes that there is an insurrectionary movement. I mean, Lenin said, when is a revolution? When the rulers can no longer rule, and those who are ruled are not willing to be ruled anymore. And we don't know when that will occur. That can occur, 5 years from now, 30 years from now. It's a fool is a prophet is a fool. You can't predict when that will happen. But whenever it does happen, people have to be ready to understand that the state has to be replaced with a new kind of state. And that is what occurred in Russia, in China, in Vietnam, in Cuba, in revolutionary Cuba. They expropriated the bourgeoisie not on day one, but in the first year and a half after the revolution, in 1958, 59. And that's what we have to prepare, not to miseducate working people, but to explain the Marxist concept of the state in all clarity and to fight for transitional demands, reforms that will give the working class the opportunity to fight for everything, to fight to win, to change society, root and branch.
Now, Ivan, there's a lot that Barry said over there, but I do not want us to get completely derailed and attack on who did what horrible mistake and whatnot when it comes to history. But just when we but let's just talk about specific policies that distinguish the Communist Party of Canada from the NDP. So why do you think specifically leftists, especially those who care about Palestinian liberation and even Indigenous liberation, why the Communist Party of Canada, its proposals are much better than the NDP? I'm curious your response.
Because Communist Party believes in not supporting the genocide, because it believes in withdrawing from NATO. It believes in peace, essentially, and believes in cutting military budget by 75%. That's the answer to that question. I mean, generally, like there was, a lot that Barry said there, and I won't get into specifics. I just we can
there, but that's exactly why I don't want us to get completely derailed. But just when it's okay. Like I know, I believe the Communist Party of Canada is very much in favor for full-on BDS, democratic, secular, one-state solution. Barry's organization, Socialist Action Canada and NDP Socialist Caucus, certainly are advocates of BDS and the democratic, secular, one-state solution. But so if we talk about if we talk about Indigenous liberation and addressing the grievances of Indigenous Canadians, what about the Communist Party? Do you think is way better, much better, in terms of addressing the grievances that Indigenous people have compared to what the NDP has? Yeah, your response.
I mean, we can begin by simply recognizing that NDP has been a partner in the government that has continued the genocide of Indigenous people in the form of creation of homelessness and poverty. So, what I see on the streets is among homeless people in a town which has 2% native population, 25% on the street are Indigenous. So, socialism is about lifting everybody up, and it's about, not freezing people to death, which is what NDP is doing and what NDP policies are doing, and which is what NDP does in municipal governments. So, in Canada, officially municipal governments are not, the people are not officially representing parties in municipal governments, but people who are members of the party, like myself, run for positions in municipal governments, and two previous councils in Kingston have been dominated by NDP members, and these people are routinely voting for homelessness creating initiatives, for homelessness creating measures. We can go on, such as handing over, I don't know, $60 million to a project that will create for profit, not for profit, geared to market housing, for example, or 2 million here, 2 million there, to private for-profit developers to create what they call affordable housing, which is not affordable housing. So for making it easier for developers to build. cutting red tape. That's what I got fired over because they wouldn't let me pose a question, which was going to be, why. And I mean, I'm sure you'll agree with me here because you're a socialist. Anybody on the left will. Why would you, cut these development fees for with the purpose of creating more supply of unaffordable housing when we have 30 years of evidence that allowing market to take care of the housing issue has created unprecedented homelessness and death. Homelessness is death. It's a death sentence in a country where temperatures are -20, -30.
Yeah.
Homelessness is a death sentence. Not to mention the drugs. We can go into all that, but Communist Party has a policy of creating safe supply for safe supply and all the services necessary for rehab and all these measures that will keep the people who are on the street alive. And again, we don't have all night, but there is a direct line running from clearing the plains. What that's the name of a book that everyone should read, whereby indigenous people were put on reserves and starved to death, to what's happening now. The streets are full. The streets are full of indigenous people dying, and they are, to me personally. Again, I don't speak for the Communist Party. I'm not an executive. I'm not your leader of your party. I'm not a leader of mine. But I don't make policy. We actually have a process for making policy, so that the leader can just write whatever they want and put up on a website, which is how many other leftist groups
Well,
function.
Ivan, I'm glad you mentioned housing. I actually do have a question prepared on housing, but before we get to that, and just moving things on, Barry, what just very quickly, when we talk about indigenous liberation, can you remind people what when Socialist Action Canada has their web events, their live streams on YouTube, can you say what is it that Elizabeth is always advocating when talking about indigenous liberation and addressing the grievances of indigenous people?
Our slogan is restitution before reconciliation. That means returning all the resources, all the lands to the commons, which is the way they were governed by indigenous people here who were here thousands of years before European settlers came. Restitution before reconciliation. Liberals and others who want to reform the existing state, they talk about, reconciliation. I don't know what the Communist Party slogan is, but I do.
I just want to know that because that's very interesting. And last I know about the Communist Party of Canada, when I had the former central organizer, Jay Watts, is that the Communist Party of Canada does believe in instituting the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous people, and that
so does the NDP. So does the NDP.
Okay. And that if Indigenous people if their communities wanted to even secede from the Canadian Federation, the Communist Party would grant that. It also believes in a special in a constituent assembly, which would give Indigenous people seats in Parliament and stuff like that. But now, shifting gears.
Well, can I just say a word about that? We're for smashing the Canadian state. We're for liberating all the oppressed.
Vote for NDP.
Nations within the Canadian state.
Vote for NDP. Smash Canadian state.
Wait, guys.
Absolutely. We're for the breakup of the Canadian state to put in place a voluntary.
Exactly what Lenin would have done.
Okay, guys.
Well, that's exactly what the Soviet Union was. It was the coming together
of
revolutions in a number of states.
Guys, let's not get derailed. Let's not get derailed. Okay, look, shifting gears a bit. So, Barry, you've said repeatedly that while you appreciate and understand people's frustration with the NDP, and some not even wanting to engage with the NDP, but you have said that the same folks don't have the same attitude towards various unions and its leadership, who, like the NDP leadership, are very capitalist, indifferent towards Canadian imperialism, even supportive of a form of it, and not interested in the well-being of its members and wanting to buck or completely change the unjust system of capitalism. So can you talk about that? And I actually would like Ivan's response to that issue of the union leadership themselves being very pro-capitalist. And just to give an idea to people that the NDP isn't the only problem with the left failing to advance, but a bunch of major unions endorsed Doug Ford, a conservative, a true fiscal conservative and socially regressive person, as Premier of Ontario. And don't tell me that that guy has been giving unions a bed of roses and chocolates. So there are some unions who blindly support the Liberal Party, and many are pretty reactionary, especially those from the arms industry, the fossil fuel industry, the mining industry, farmers, and of course police. So Barry,
a few years ago, the Canadian auto workers, before that union, emerged with others to form Unifor, the Canadian auto workers broke with the NDP, and some on the left, greeted that as being a big step forward. But what it meant was that the CAW, now Unifor, plays the game of lesser evil politics. They vote for the Liberal or the NDP candidate who they think has the best chance of winning in a given electoral district. That's crossing the picket line. That's a betrayal of the members of the union and a betrayal of the working class as a whole. That's not an advance. And we said as much at the time. We said if the CAW breaks with the NDP, instead of fighting for socialist policies in the interests of auto workers and all workers represented by that union and all unions, then it would be a setback. It would be a retreat from class independence to, the policy for which the Communist Party is famous, known as popular frontism. That is a class collaborationist, multi-class alliance, which is their policy. When Stephen Harper, was it 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, prorogued Parliament, it was to avoid an election where the Liberal Party, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois had made a provisional agreement that they would form the government. Not the Bloc directly because of its position for Quebec sovereignty, but it would cooperate with the Liberals and the NDP. What was the position of the Communist Party of Canada concerning that confabulation? They supported it, but they wanted to be part of it. They said there should be a Communist Party presence in that bourgeois government. So this is demonstration of what opportunism is all about. Not drawing the class line, but simply saying, well, if the Raqqa party in Zionist Israel can be part of the government, we'll support Israel. If the Communist Party can be part of an anti-Harper coalition in government, we'll support that parliament as well. That's not Marxism. Sorry, that's not even remote.
When you said to join bourgeois parliaments and to advance the revolutionary propaganda, he said, have your own party. Okay, let's go back to left-wing communism.
He said no coalitionism.
Faster, in disorder.
He said no coalitionism.
What he says there is, he says, join bourgeois unions and fight for communist line. Don't join bourgeois parties. He said, have your own communist party. Run in elections, advance the bourgeois. Sorry, I'm getting upset a little bit. There is no mention of socialism or working class in the NDP. Working class has nothing to do with NDP. Working class itself has nothing to do with NDP. NDP was started by labor aristocracy by bureaucrats, by union bureaucrats, the professional managerial class, and continues to this day to represent academics, rich students, and labor aristocracy, the people who, you agree, are pro-capitalist. And the other day, sorry, a few years back,
that's a pure fantasy.
Wait.
A report came out.
Pure exaggeration, Ivan. Pure exaggeration.
A report came out which
go to an NDP convention.
I've been to the NDP convention. It's labor bureaucrats. Sorry,
we hand out thousands of copies of this magazine at NDP conventions.
An article came out.
Very well received.
Journalists Canadian journalists exposed the fact that more members of the NDP parliament were landlords than of the Conservative Party. These guys are literally capitalists. They're small. They're appealing to small business. Or
Ivan,
it's about putting, giving your own socialist action. Okay, I went on the website over here. His party is advocating supporting small landlords. It says we need to support our housing is to support small landlords. This is supporting capitalism straight up. So, like, this is
that's
not
nonsense.
Okay,
that's complete nonsense.
It's on your website.
But Ivan,
it's on your website.
Ivan. Okay. Now,
what we're talking about is workers who rent the basement apartment. You call that a small landlord? Well,
you
so
call
be
it a small. I don't know. You call it a small landlord.
Okay, but
I'm explaining to you. I'm explaining, Ivan.
Wait, guys.
Okay for workers
I'm explaining to you what it means.
Rent housing.
When we're talking about small landlord, although I wouldn't use that expression. What we mean is a worker who saves up for a lifetime or inherits the house of his parents and then rents out the basement apartment because he can't afford to pay the taxes or the hydro or the water bill. Now, would you say that the worker who rents out his basement apartment should be taxed out of existence? That's an attack on the working class. Workers rent out rooms or basement apartments.
Wait, Ivan. Okay, let me ask this Ivan. Let me ask this very, very important question because I think it's a very, very important question. Okay, I don't disagree with you on all of your criticisms towards the NDP. I honestly, I really don't disagree with you on even your historical arguments about the NDP. But very important question, because this is something that Barry has brought up many times before, is, okay, what about, though, the unions themselves? Because the unions themselves, you could argue, are also are also labor aristocracy. They're a mixed leadership class and so forth. So why not also abandon all of those unions? And I mean, if we want to start new unions from scratch, I'm not entirely against that. But why do leftists like like yourself who say do not support the NDP? Why not have that same attitude led towards all the unions, given the horrendous examples both me and Barry have brought up when it comes to unions supporting reactionary and pro-capitalist parties and so forth?
Because okay, first of all, unions are, Barry probably knows better, but I think maybe at most 20% of the labor force is organized. I think it's less.
29.8.
Nice. That's a significant. To go back to my original point, okay? I of course I never said that when I say that capitalist parties are all, appealing to the working class, they're all supported by the working class, and that they are working class party in a sense that they have worker members and worker voters, okay, and that they speak to the workers in their platforms. What I mean
doesn't make them workers' parties.
What I mean is that it's very important to recognize that the working class is not labor aristocracy. So there's a huge difference between working class and labor aristocracy. What we need to do is not address the left, because the left is not working class. The left, the left is not the working class. The left is.
Ivan, you've got your own definition of everything, but it doesn't correspond.
Movements, academics, and so on. So the left You know, does
We don't have any academics in
does
our ranks.
You know, does a Liberal Party get more working class votes than NDP?
Wait, but Ivan,
Yes, Liberal Party and Conservative Party get
workers who vote
more
for the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party do not vote as working class members of the working class. They vote as atomized individuals with false consciousness.
They are working class.
They're not voting as workers.
They are working class.
When people vote for the NDP,
no, working class.
When people vote for the NDP, they're voting as workers.
Opinion. Working class is a sociological category.
Ivan, look, it's very important, but it's getting us way too derailed. Just answer this specific question. Okay, I understand.
Would you abandon the unions? That's the question.
Again,
would you abandon the unions?
No, of course you don't abandon the unions.
And you can't abandon a workers' party.
You join the unions, you organize unions, and you fight to like Lenin told us, to
fight for class struggle policies
in a revolutionary direction. But that doesn't.
And you do the same thing in the
Conservative Party of Canada because all the workers are in the Conservative Party and try to turn it into a revolutionary party.
You know what the main task in the United States is today? In the United States, the main task facing the working class is the establishment of a Labour Party in the United States to do what Canadian workers
did. There's a Labour Party in England. There's a Labour Party in Australia. There's a Labour Party.
Yeah, but in the United States,
and it genocides in every bourgeois state system. It's
Ivan. In the United States, your party, the party you support, or the sister party of the Canadian Communist Party, the Communist Party of the United States, voted for the Democrats, voted for genocide Biden. The Communist Party didn't run a candidate for president.
So did all kinds of Trotskyists that you're affiliated with that are in SPD and SDP and all kinds of socialists, so-called. That's not fair. I'm not going to defend the United States Communist Party.
But the Communist Party of the United States has been doing this for generations
over the years. Everybody on the left made mistakes over the years. We're talking about
but you continue to make the same mistake year after year after year after year after year after year.
So do you. You keep telling people to join.
We never voted for the Democratic Party.
That's going to send their kids to
guys. We said that this is going to be a good, clean discussion, and now it's getting to scream. So I had to intervene. Everybody chill. But Ivan, no, but okay. You know what? Let's skip that question.
Still answered your question. Yes, you join a workplace, you become a part of the union. Get involved, be a part of the union. Of course, if you're unorganized, you organize. That's common sense. But do you need to join an NDP, a bourgeois party?
No. Well, your union. What if your union is affiliated to it?
You overthrow your union because your union Democrats are making you.
That's strike breaking. Sorry, brother. That's strike breaking.
To overthrow the bourgeois labor aristocracy that's leading my union.
You said overthrow the union. You didn't say overthrow the leadership.
The leadership. What did you mean by my union? You meant the labor aristocracy that makes the policies.
No, that's not what I meant.
I've been to NDP conventions. They're the same as labor conventions. I've been to labor.
Okay, but Ivan.
If your union is affiliated to the NDP, your duty is to go to that party convention and fight for your union class struggle policy.
To the floor. Nothing ever makes it to the floor.
That's an exaggeration. That's an exaggeration based on ignorance.
Okay, guys.
Let me talk to labor aristocracy. You forgot all about that.
Okay, Ivan. Okay, guys.
Labor aristocracy is like 1% of the working class.
Really?
All right, guys. Okay, Ivan. Okay.
And they're the ones that are running the NDP racket. That 1%.
Not exclusively.
Ivan, come on.
There are ebbs and flows.
We're getting okay. Okay, Ivan. Just if you can, because I have 3 questions left. But please, if you can just answer, if you can just answer this one question. Okay. Again, look, I understand your frustration with the NDP. Barry understands your frustration with the NDP, but the unions are also a big problem. The unions are also all the criticisms you make about the NDP, you can say that about the unions, but why? But since the NDP historically, the working class and unions support them, so why not fight to reform the NDP the way you would a union?
Or fight to split the NDP?
The same reason that you don't fight to reform the Labour Party in England, the same reason you don't fight to reform the Labour Party in Australia. These are bourgeois parties. They don't talk about class. They don't use the word working class. They're not working class parties. They don't use the word socialism. They're bourgeois parties who support genocide and war. And
all right.
It's that simple, you know. And
but if we were to follow the logic,
and the other two big reasons are there is an actual working class that hates capitalism, that hates war, that hates.
But they don't vote for the Communist Party in Canada. The Communist Party candidates in the next federal election will get 100 or 200 votes.
You were talking for 3 hours. I mean, I did after, but like eventually, please let me finish. The
Communist Party will get 200 votes.
Okay, Barry. Ivan, finish your point, and then I do have to get to the last two questions.
The bigger reason for not joining the NDP is because there's a working class that hates capitalism and that needs to be organized. And that working class should be organized by parties who are interested in revolution, in creating socialism, in building an actual working class leftist future. Okay, now that doesn't have to be Communist Party alone, but it needs to be the parties that are actually on record believing in such things as socialism and peace and working class power, working class expropriation of the capitalists.
Okay, now my second to last question is this, and it's actually to you, Ivan. So, Communist Party of Canada and communist parties across the world, sadly, many judge the book by the cover and think communists want to build concentration camps for the upper class and middle class, especially the upper middle class. So, my question is this: since a lot of people are going to judge the Communist Party by its cover and not actually look at the brilliant program you guys have, why waste the limited resource a party like yours has on an election, which the odds seem overwhelmingly stacked against you? And why not just be an advocacy political group that hopefully influences people power movements like unions and so forth? I'm curious your response on this.
It's simple, because that's not first of all, you know, Communist Party is not a pure electoral party. It is active in the unions. It's active in social movements. It's active in peace movement. There would be no peace movement in this country. There would be, like, by the way, every policy that NDP takes credit for, and the so-called socialists who support it give credit to NDP for, was on the books of Communist Party before it was on the NDP books. And Communist Party exists longer than NDP in Canada, and it's, you know, unemployment insurance, healthcare, whatever you name it, everything was on the books of the Communist Party before NDP, and a lot of it was introduced by conservative and liberal governments. So it's not really a purvey of NDP or whatever. Sorry, back to the question. The question was, why should we why are we taking part in elections? We're taking part in elections because it's an opportunity to get some exposure, because we want to advance our ideas. You know, you enter, like, everybody wants to know, right? This is why, because you called me. You called me to talk to Barry, and you want your people who listen to you, they want to find out what Communist Party thinks. This wouldn't have happened if the election wasn't going on. So it's kind of similar to I would assume, to what the other leftist groups, why they are, you know, involved as well, right?
Yeah, and then very quickly before I get to this final question and final thoughts is, okay, because a lot of people judge communists by by the cover, and because there is I'm not for anti-communist leftism as many others are, but because of that, many people don't, many people, the moment they hear communists, even they don't even want, they're not even curious. So why not then be more of a strong advocacy group which influences people power movements rather than do electoral politics, especially in a place as so heavily capitalist like Canada.
I think that just because something is, precisely because there's this stigma around communism, because people assume things. That's exactly why we need to fight for it, and we need to talk about it. Like communism has a long history. It has had a huge impact and continues to have a huge impact on the world. I mean, China is ruled by the Communist Party, and 20th century, there was a huge communist movement. So a lot of things happened that are being handpicked, and a lot of lies were manufactured about communism. But I'm not going to say that they were all lies, but I'm going to say that
which ones were true?
The anti-communist, anti-communists, including the anti-communist left, has had a really good success in tarnishing the image of communism in the West, because they've had the support of the big business and the people who own all the means of production, all the means of propaganda in the West. So that's why it's important to talk about communism, because it was communism that gave us welfare state. It was communism that gave us healthcare. It was communism that gave us education, whatever, free education, daycare, all these things that happened in the West at certain standard of living. After all, communism is ultimately, if you look at the big picture, and if you consider the history of the 20th century, it is the fear of communism that has forced United States to end apartheid. It was fear of communism that through this kind of the Soviet Union introduced universal suffrage, universal daycare, universal healthcare, all these things, and then communist parties in the West were agitating for them, and then slowly through NDP and other bourgeois parties, these measures were introduced. So like currently, China is a huge reason, I believe, geopolitically, that the West is not having us all in concentration camps. Somebody mentioned concentration camps. Concentration camps are a capitalist thing. Concentration camps, South Africa, concentration camps in Zambia.
Have you ever heard of Siberia?
Yeah, I've heard of Siberia, yeah.
Yeah. Stalin killed more communists than Hitler. You know that? Stalin killed more communists than Hitler.
You know who says that? You know who says that? Kurz says that.
He sent millions of people to jails and punishment in Siberia simply because of their political views. The left opposition was not. Excuse me, Yuri. You gave Ivan a few minutes. I want to respond.
Your Nazi,
it's true.
Hitler killed 24 million Russians. Okay, 24 million Russians.
That's not what I said.
Stalin beat him.
Stalin killed more
from Nazis.
Ivan, Stalin killed more communists than Hitler did. More communists.
Nazis than
Stalin killed more communists than Hitler did.
Again,
what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to add to this is, why is Communist Party, or the name communism, so disregarded in popular discourse? Why is that? Two reasons, and you're right about one of them, because of the distortion by the bourgeois propaganda mill. That's true. But there's another reason, my friend. There's another reason. Repression. The Communist Party had a member of the Ontario legislature in the late 40s and early 1950s. His name was Joe Salzberg. Why did Joe Salzberg quit the Communist Party? Well, he went to Russia and he saw how minorities were being persecuted, particularly Jewish people in the Soviet Union. He came back, he told the story, and he quit. the party because of its discrimination policy. Well, that policy didn't begin when Joe Salzberg appeared in the Soviet Union. It began long before, when the left opposition was driven out and jailed in Siberia, and Trotsky was assassinated by a Stalinist agent in Mexico City in August 1940. This is how Stalin treated opposition, treated those whose opinions differed from his opinion. You can say that, okay, this is propaganda and it's untrue, but you know, the purge trials were very well known around the world. You know, the main leadership of the Communist Party during the Russian Revolution was the Bolshevik Party, so then known as, the top leadership was killed by Stalin after the purge trials. They were shot in the head because they were forced to self-criticize, admit things that they never did, and then they were shot because they committed the things that they admitted to doing, which were not actually done. The Soviet Union and Stalinism is the problem here, not the worker state that Lenin and Trotsky founded and that made all the breakthroughs in terms of equal rights for homosexuals, the right to vote for women, housing available to all, good housing. All of these things were instituted by the young Soviet Republic. But after that, the 5-year plans that followed that were strictly dictated from the top down. And if you disagreed, your life was shortened by decades, And I want to mention one more thing, just one more thing. Vietnam. You talk about the Communist Party being an advocate for peace, whatever peace means. Peace can mean the peace of the graveyard. The Vietnam anti-war movement, which is where I began my political experience as a high school student in the late 1960s, early 1970s. I joined the anti-war movement and I discovered something. The Trotskyists and the anti-imperialists were for out now, out of Vietnam now. No end Canadian complicity, US out now. Emphasis on the word now. What was the policy of the Communist Party? The Communist Party was set the date for the withdrawal of US troops. Set the date. The majority of the anti-war movement said, don't set the date, out now. There's no date, there's nothing to negotiate at a round table in Paris. The war in Vietnam is an imperialist war, and the imperialists should get the fuck out of there immediately.
You had nothing to do with Vietnam winning the war, okay? Where did the guns?
The anti-war movement had a lot to do.
The war movement was 1%. 99% was Vietnamese armed by the Soviet Union, by the communist Soviet Union. That's what happened in Vietnam.
Well,
listen,
they were armed through an eyedropper.
You know what? No, I'm not. I never said that Stalin was perfect. That's like
perfect.
You know,
perfect.
No, never said that. There was a struggle for power between Trotsky and Stalin. A lot of people died, and Stalin won the struggle. What happened then
wasn't a democratic struggle.
Exterminated 6 million Jews and 24 million Soviet citizens, and Soviet Union.
Had there been a fair election, had there been freedom of speech and freedom of organization, Stalin would have been defeated. Stalin would have been defeated.
Soviet Union liberated Auschwitz. Okay, so tell me about anti-Jewishness. Like, the Jews were all over the Soviet Union, all kinds of power positions of respect and power. And it was Jews in Soviet Union who had a huge role in ending.
Guys.
That is bullshit. That is bullshit.
That's bullshit.
Stalin established an autonomous region called Azerbaijan.
Gentlemen.
He tried to persuade the Jews to go live in Asia.
We're going to forget that because some Canadian communist changed his mind and decided that Trotsky's student movement is going to end the Vietnamese war.
No, he didn't go that far. He didn't go that far.
Okay.
Guns
last question
is what liberated Vietnam.
Okay, last question. And remember, we are supposed to be talking about why people should be voting for the NDP or not be voting for the NDP. Let's not
you knew what you were doing, man. You knew what you were doing. You love it.
Last question. Okay, last question is this. On housing. We're going to start with Ivan, and then I want Barry to close us out. Ivan, so you ran for mayor of Kingston, Ontario. You were part of a collective of leftists who argue plain and simple housing is a right. It shouldn't be a commodity, not this private gentleman's club of capitalism. Can you give us your critical assessment of the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party's housing plan? What is it about the NDP plan that you don't like? And your final pitch to folks on the Communist Party why their housing plan is better than the NDP. Your response, and then I have and I have a final question for Barry. Then I have to conclude all of this.
It's really simple. NDP, liberals, and conservatives have the same platform on housing. They believe, like good neoliberals, that the issue is supply, and they all believe in building, in making it easier for developers, shovel-ready developers, to build more housing for profit. And they all mention what they call affordable housing being included as a part of it, and supporting not-for-profit developers. Now that's not good enough. That's a code word for unaffordable geared-to-market housing. The definition of affordable housing by Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or Housing and Mortgage Corporation, whatever, has been sliding from 20% of income, geared to income, to now, meaning all kinds of things between 80%, 60%, to be fair, of the market rate, and some kind of percentiles geared to the neighborhood and whatever. So if you're in Rosedale, affordable apartment is, some thousands and thousands of dollars. So this is the policy that the NDP has adopted, and that the liberals have adopted, and conservatives. They also go on about making it easier for people to own homes. Nonsense. I mean, the prices are. It's a subsidy at best, a subsidy for very privileged.
And your party, and what's your party's advocacy for housing and yeah.
The Communist Party of Canada believes in building 3 million rent geared to income housing units.
And explain what that is, actually.
Rent geared to income at I think, I don't know if it's 20 or 30%, but basically, if you're on welfare making $700 a month, that means that your rent will be, I don't know, 200 or so. So it's 30%, 20 or 30% of your income. It's simple. I mean, there are other things. There's rent control. There's vacancy decontrol. There's all kinds of other issues which continue to support the market mechanism, and which, there are other things. Communist Party believes in reforming the legal tribunals that decide on matters of disputes between landlords and tenants, and so on. But essentially, the bottom line is we believe in building social, publicly owned, rent geared to income housing to house people who are on the street, and none of the bourgeois parties do. And again, this is not just the Communist Party. I cannot see how in anybody's right mind there's a I don't see why the rest of the left, the actual left, the other left-wing parties are not also being supported in this instance.
All right, Barry, if you want to respond, you can, and feel free. Make your final pitch or plea why leftists in this country, why the mass working class, precarious middle class, people of all marginalized backgrounds, from Black people, Indigenous people, the queer community, feminists and anti-imperialists, and peacemongers, and eco-justice, social justice, racial justice warriors and activists should vote NDP, and when voting, understand that it's a constructive protest of vote, and it's not and it's of the utmost importance to smash the liberal and conservative hold on Canadian politics and international affairs. So, go ahead, Barry.
the NDP, a vote for the NDP is a class vote. The NDP is not a party like the others. The NDP is a working class party. All you need to do is go to an NDP convention and it just hits you in the face. You cannot ignore it unless you want to say, well, the unions that are not expressly class struggle socialist should be abandoned, should be turned away and rebuild the unions from scratch. Well, that means you would ignore the 3 million people who are in unions, which with pro-capitalist leadership. And that's not a policy for any organizer to follow. That would be the ruination of a genuine left. Concerning the policy on housing, I agree with what Ivan said with respect to the kind of housing program we need, except that there should be no subsidy to the developers, no subsidy to the housing construction conglomerates. The state needs to build the housing that's needed, and also the state needs to take a position, this is a reform, which I support, where there's vacancy in the large commercial office towers, they should be converted to housing.
That's included in the Communist Party.
Well, that's great. That's great. We agree on that.
We definitely.
Hallelujah. So, vacancies should be used so that people don't freeze on the streets, so that they're not neglected, so that they're not starved into submission. That's what needs to be done. Now, what is the position of the NDP on this? The NDP, contrary to what Ivan said, is for building rent-geared to income housing and building it on a large scale. Unfortunately, they say it would be a partnership between the state and private developers and construction firms.
True. Show me where that is. I've looked at NDP platform.
I'll send it to you. Yuri will give me your email address and I'll send it to you.
NDP does not talk about rent.
It's been Jagmeet Singh just did I don't like Jagmeet Singh, and I think one of the good things that's going to come out of this federal election is that he's going to lose his seat. He's going to lose his seat.
Okay, Ivan.
As a result, there's going to be a leadership race. I think that's good.
Yeah.
And we may see some good people in that race, like Matthew Green and Nikki Ashton and Heather McPherson and Leah Gazan in Winnipeg. These are left-wing social democrats. Now, my final point is this. Even though you claim the Communist Party is revolutionary, the Communist Party never uses the word revolution. Never. In its press, in its leaflets, in its election propaganda, never uses that word. And that's not an accident. It's not an oversight. It's a deliberate choice because the Communist Party is not revolutionary. It's not for a revolution in this country or in any country near this country. And the final point is this. Whereas the NDP is a place where workers gather to debate policy and platform to serve the interests of our class. And the NDP will get 1 or 2 million votes. In fact, they've gotten as many as 4 million votes in some federal elections. The Communist Party candidates, though few they may be, will get less than 1% in the ridings where they run and will be less than 0.01% on a cross-country basis. So for leftists to vote for parties that have, never mind winning, have no chance of even being noticed is an absurd waste of energy and time. Activists who understand the class struggle, who understand the class character of the state, who understand the long fight we need to wage in order to get Canada out of NATO and to oppose war, not to be for peace in some abstract, liberal, idiomatic sense. Peace, what does peace mean? Take an anti-war, anti-imperialist stand, then they have to come together through their unions and mass social movements to discuss these things. And they're not going to be able to discuss them in a hall of the Communist Party, with 20 people and a dog and maybe 100 votes in the election. That's an absurd waste of time. What we need is for the activists to get into the unions and get into the NDP and get into the anti-poverty movement, get into the environmental movement, solidarity with Indigenous people, solidarity with Palestine, and fight there and wage a fight there that will have reflection inside mass organizations, the unions and the NDP. That's what needs to be done. That is, in fact, what has won and helped to defeat the war in the imperialist war in Vietnam. The Vietnamese, of course, bore the majority of it, but not all of it. The international anti-war movement had an immense effect, and the Vietnamese said so. The Vietnamese said so. The Vietnamese came to our conventions of the anti-war movement. Contrary to what you may think, Ivan, they said what we were doing was extremely important, and they were right about that
Cute
too.
no, very cute. When
Well,
the Westerners, can I just say why people should not vote for NDP and they should vote for the
You already did. You already did.
conclusion?
uh,
Just we need to organize the working class
all
for
right,
a revolution and not the working class aristocracy. Abandon the bourgeois professional managerial class, abandon the labor aristocracy, build the left. Yes, Communist Party is small, but don't just join Communist Party. Yes, join the Communist Party. Join the Communist Party ML. Join Barry's group and turn it away from NDP. join the left. Let's build an actual left. If you want peace, you have to fight for peace. If you want revolution, you have to fight for revolution.
okay.
The Waffle made the mistake of leaving the NDP and they had 10,000 members. But when we have 20,000 members in the NDP, we will leave the NDP and run candidates everywhere and help to galvanize revolution sentiment. That's certainly what we're going to do, but we're not there yet, and neither are you.
All right. Well,
come together.
Okay, listen. Okay, well,
we're stronger together.
We can't even come together for May Day, although we've proposed it for 30 years.
Well,
you guys don't cooperate with anybody unless you control it.
We'll work on that. We'll work on that.
Okay. Well,
yeah, we work on that. Let me know.
Guys,
keep me informed.
all right. Well, we were joined on this edition of
That's the tragedy. Sorry, that's the tragedy, Larry. Sorry, Barry. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy of the life.
Guys. You can continue. Guys. You can continue this.
You should ask yourself why that has happened.
Okay.
You should ask yourself that question.
Listen, all right, guys, you can continue this squabble offline, but I need to close this out. Well, you were joined on this edition of 1+1 for all things Canada edition on this special debate on who the Canadian left should vote for. My special and heartfelt thank you to both of my guests, and let me remind folks, Barry Weisleder of the NDP Socialist Caucus, a member of Socialist Action Canada and Workers' Action Movement, which is trying to wham it to the union bosses and making sure that the unions are the vanguard of revolutionary change. And he was making the case why the Canadian left and left-leaning folks should vote for the NDP. And yes, check out, visit the website and check out the newspapers that both Socialist Action Canada and the NDP Socialist Caucus does. And his opponents, our other guest today, was Ivan Stoiljkovic, violin teacher, a Yugoslavian-Canadian from Serbia. He was a communist, lifelong housing as a right activist, member of the Communist Party of Canada, and a lifelong leftist activist. Gentlemen, thank you both. Good luck in your campaigns and advocacy.
Comrades, not this gentleman shit. We're comrades.
And let me just say the following. Here's hoping people vote wisely, and even if there's hesitancy, I would say vote NDP, and I hope people simply do not vote for the Liberal Party. In the name of Palestine and all things holy and socialism and in true working class solidarity, I hope people vote against Liberal. Give them and the Conservatives a red card. And personally, yes, I personally advocate that people vote for the NDP as a protest vote, but immediately mobilize to make sure they advance a socialist agenda, a racial, social, equal justice agenda. And if there is a communist in your writing and you can't vote for the NDP for whatever legitimate grievances, then by all means vote CPC. But do not vote Liberal. Do not do tactical voting. Do not vote Conservative. Do not vote for the People's Party of Canada. As always, folks, please share this episode widely. Donate to 1+1 and donate generously to 1+1 if you can. And I will put the links to the organizations of both of my respective guests. And folks would be wise to join both of those organizations. All my best until then. Good night and good luck. And we are out.